The bus rattled along the cracked streets of the city, carrying the weight of weary commuters, restless teens, and the faint smell of gasoline mixed with old leather seats. Among them sat a quiet girl, her small frame pressed against the window, clutching her worn backpack as though it were her shield. Her name was Maya. She rarely spoke, her soft voice often swallowed by the chaos of laughter, gossip, and insults that echoed inside those yellow walls. She had learned that silence was safer, that blending in was better than standing out. But even silence had a way of drawing attention when the wrong eyes were watching. 3 seats back, a cluster of boys whispered and chuckled, their voices sharp like knives cutting through the air. They had noticed her. They always did. Maya, the girl who never fought back. The one who carried her books like they were more important than the world itself. She was an easy target in their eyes. One of the boys, a lanky kid with a cruel grin, leaned forward, his voice dripping with malice. "Why you always sitting there like you better than us? You think you smart or something?" The others laughed, feeding off the tension like hyenas circling prey. Maya shifted uncomfortably, staring harder out the window, pretending she hadn't heard. She had perfected that act, pretend, ignore, hope it ends, but it never truly ended. This time, though, something was different. This time, they didn't just want words. They wanted fear. As the bus jolted to a stop, one of the bullies slid into the aisle, moving closer. His hand shot out suddenly, gripping Maya's neck, not tightly enough to choke, but with a mocking force that sent terror rushing through her body. Her backpack slipped from her lap onto the floor, books spilling open, pages scattering. The laughter grew louder. "Look at her face," one of them sneered. "She's about to cry." What they didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that Maya wasn't alone. Just 2 rows away sat her father, dressed in plain clothes. His broad shoulders relaxed, but his eyes sharp as ever. To the world, he looked like any tired parent riding home with his child. But behind that calm exterior was a man forged in fire. A man trained to respond when lives were on the line. He was a member of the city's SWAT team, a veteran of situations most men would crumble under. And right now, as he watched a group of boys lay their hands on his daughter, a storm began to rise inside him. His name was Marcus. To his team, he was a steady hand in chaos, the one who could breach a door without flinching, who could talk a gunman down with words sharper than bullets. But to Maya, he was just dad, the man who packed her lunches, who checked under her bed for monsters when she was younger, who told her that no matter how cruel the world was, she carried a strength inside her that no one could take away. Marcus's jaw tightened as he witnessed the cruelty unfold. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to spring forward and put an end to it immediately. But years of training had taught him patience, restraint, and the power of timing. He needed to be precise. He needed to make sure this wasn't just about stopping the bullies. It was about teaching them something they would never forget. Maya's eyes flickered toward him briefly, almost pleading. She didn't shout for help. She didn't even speak his name. But in that glance, Marcus saw everything. Her fear, her humiliation, her desperate hope that someone, anyone, would protect her. That was all it took. Marcus stood slowly, his presence towering over the row. His movement was calm, deliberate, but the weight of his gaze cut through the laughter instantly. The boy holding Maya's neck released her as though her skin had burned him. The others shifted nervously, their bravado faltering under the sudden realization that someone had been watching. And not just anyone. "What did you just put your hands on?" Marcus's voice was low, measured, but it carried a power that silenced the entire bus. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. The bullies fumbled for excuses, their false confidence evaporating. We were just playing," one stammered. "It wasn't serious, man." Marcus stepped closer. His eyes locked on the boy who had dared to touch his daughter. "You think it's a game to put your hands on a young black girl just because she's quiet? You think intimidation makes you strong?" The boy's mouth opened, then closed, no words forming. For the first time, he looked smaller than his cruelty, stripped of the power he thought he had. Maya's hands trembled as she gathered her books from the floor. Marcus knelt beside her, helping pick up the pages, his voice softening only for her. "You okay, baby girl?" She nodded faintly, tears threatening but unspilled. He touched her shoulder gently, reassuring her without words. Then he stood again, his full height imposing. "Let me be clear," Marcus said, his voice carrying across every row. "You don't touch her. You don't mock her. You don't even breathe in her direction unless it's with respect. Do you understand?" The bus was silent, every eye locked on him. The bullies nodded quickly, their arrogance crushed beneath the weight of a father who was more than they could ever imagine. But Marcus wasn't finished. He looked at the rest of the students who had sat by, laughing or ignoring, while his daughter suffered. And for the rest of you, he continued, his tone sharp but not unkind, silence in the face of cruelty makes you no better than the ones causing it. You think because it's not your neck being grabbed, it's not your problem? One day it will be. And you'll pray someone stands up for you. Don't wait for that day, be that person now. The words hung heavy in the air, pressing against the conscience of every young soul on that bus. Marcus knew lectures didn't always stick, but truth had a way of seeping into places where laughter and mockery couldn't reach. He had planted the seed. Maya leaned against him as the bus lurched forward again, her breathing still shaky but steadier now. Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. He had seen violence on the streets, in standoffs, in raids where lives hung in the balance. But nothing cut him deeper than watching cruelty directed at his child. And yet, beneath the anger, he felt something else. Pride. Pride in his daughter's quiet resilience. Pride in the way she hadn't broken down even as she was humiliated. Pride in knowing that she would leave this bus not as a victim, but as someone who had witnessed the strength of her own bloodline standing tall beside her. The ride wasn't over, and neither was the story. For Marcus knew this was bigger than one incident, bigger than a single bus ride. This was about confronting a culture that thought cruelty was entertainment, that silence was acceptable, that a quiet black girl could be treated as invisible. And Marcus wasn't a man who let those battles go unfought. That evening, the bus ride replayed in Marcus's mind long, after the engine cooled and the city lights shimmered against the horizon. At the dinner table, Maya sat quietly, pushing peas around her plate, her appetite drowned by the humiliation she had felt just hours earlier. Marcus watched her, his chest tight with a mixture of sorrow and anger. He knew she carried the silence of that moment like an invisible bruise, one that wouldn't fade as easily as the marks on her neck. "You want to talk about it?" he asked gently, his voice stripped of the authority it had carried on the bus. With Maya, he was never Sergeant Marcus, never the man in black tactical gear. He was simply Dad. She hesitated, her fork trembling slightly. Finally, she whispered, "Why do they hate me? I don't even do anything to them." Her voice cracked, the innocence of her question piercing deeper than any bullet ever could. Marcus leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "Baby, they don't hate you. They hate themselves. They see something in you they don't understand. Your quiet strength, your focus, the way you carry yourself. People fear what they don't understand, and sometimes that fear turns ugly. But listen to me carefully. Their cruelty doesn't define you. It defines them." Maya blinked, her eyes glistening. But it felt like everyone was laughing, even the kids who weren't touching me. They just sat there. No one helped. Marcus swallowed hard. That truth stung, because he knew it wasn't just children who stood by. He had seen it in the world too many times, grown men turning away when injustice unfolded, women silenced by fear while cruelty went unchecked. It was a sickness that spread when courage stayed locked away. "You're right," he admitted softly. "And that's the part that cuts deepest. But that's why voices like yours matter. You're not invisible, Maya. You're not small. You've got a fire inside you even if you don't feel it yet. And I'll be right here to remind you every time the world tries to make you forget." That night after Maya had gone to bed, Marcus sat in the dim glow of the living room lamp, the weight of the day pressing heavy on his shoulders. His phone buzzed. Messages from his team about an early training session, a debrief on an upcoming operation, but his mind was elsewhere. He replayed the boy's hand on Maya's neck, the cruel laughter, the silent stares of her peers. He thought about the years he'd spent risking his life to keep strangers safe. Yet on an ordinary bus, his own daughter had been treated like prey. By morning, Marcus had made up his mind. This wasn't ending with a warning on the bus. The bullies needed to understand consequences. The school needed to understand responsibility, and Maya needed to understand that silence had no place in her story anymore. When the bus pulled up the next day, Marcus was waiting, not in the shadows, not hidden. He stood tall in plain sight, his broad stance impossible to ignore. Parents glanced curiously, kids whispered nervously, and the same boys who had mocked Maya yesterday froze when they saw him. Their laughter didn't come this time. Their steps slowed. Fear had replaced arrogance. At school, Marcus requested a meeting with the principal. Sitting across from her polished desk, He spoke with the same calm authority he used in negotiations. Your students put their hands on my daughter yesterday. They humiliated her in front of everyone. I stopped it. But what happens when another child doesn't have a father there to step in? What happens when silence lets this go on? Until it breaks someone's spirit or worse? The principal shifted uncomfortably, her hands folding and unfolding. Mr. Turner, I understand your concern, but children tease. Teasing? Marcus cut in sharply, his voice rising just enough to make the walls feel smaller. Teasing is name-calling. Teasing is childish jokes. Putting hands on a young black girl's neck isn't teasing, it's assault. It's intimidation. And if we sugarcoat it, we teach these kids that cruelty has no real consequence. The room grew quiet. Even the ticking clock seemed hesitant. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes unwavering. This isn't just about Maya. This is about every child who rides that bus. Every quiet kid who thinks they have to suffer in silence. I'm not asking for a slap on the wrist. I'm asking for accountability. The principal sighed, realizing she couldn't brush this off. Promises of disciplinary action followed, but Marcus wasn't naive. He knew paperwork alone couldn't erase cruelty. Real change came from something deeper, from shaking the conscience of those who believed power, came from hurting the vulnerable. That evening, Marcus sat with Maya again. She clutched her journal, hesitant but curious. Did they get in trouble? She asked. Marcus nodded. They'll face consequences at school. But that's not the part that matters most. The part that matters is what you choose to do with this moment. Maya tilted her head. What do you mean? He smiled gently, brushing a hand across her hair. You get to decide who you are in the face of cruelty. You can shrink, let their laughter define you, or you can rise. Let your quiet become your strength, and show them you can't be broken. Baby girl, you carry dignity inside you, and dignity is louder than their cruelty will ever be. For the first time since that bus ride, Maya smiled faintly. Not a wide grin, not a laugh, but a spark, small but undeniable. Marcus saw it, and it gave him hope. The days that followed brought whispers across the school. Some kids avoided Maya, guilt flickering in their eyes. Others approached cautiously, offering soft apologies, unsure if they were too late. Maya walked the halls with her head a little higher, not because the fear had disappeared, but because her father's words had rooted inside her. Dignity louder than cruelty. And yet Marcus knew the battle wasn't over. The world didn't change overnight. Cruelty would rise again in different forms from different faces. But so would Maya, and so would he. Because in that moment on the bus, when a bully's hand tried to claim power, something else had been born. A lesson, a legacy, and a fire that no laughter could extinguish. The weeks rolled forward, but the echoes of that bus ride lingered in ways Marcus had both expected and feared. Cruelty left stains not easily washed away, and while the school had made good on its promise of discipline, Marcus knew punishment alone didn't change hearts. It merely clipped wings until they grew back sharper. The real transformation would have to come from Maya herself, from her learning not only that she had her father's protection, but also that her own voice could carry weight. Maya was still quiet, still guarded, but something subtle had shifted. Marcus noticed it in the way she straightened her posture walking into school, in the way she no longer avoided eye contact with her peers. She had begun to read aloud more in class, her soft voice quivering at first but gaining steadiness with each passing day. Some children still whispered, but the cruelty was muted, their sharpness dulled by the memory of Marcus's warning. One Friday afternoon, Maya came home clutching a flyer. "Dad," she said, her voice laced with both nerves and hope. "There's a school assembly next week. They're letting students speak about anything they want. I was thinking, maybe I could talk." Marcus raised an eyebrow, hiding the swell of pride behind his calm expression. "Talk about what?" Her fingers tightened around the paper. "About what happened. About how silence makes things worse. About how being quiet doesn't mean being weak." For a moment, Marcus didn't answer. He just studied her face, the determination flickering behind her eyes, the courage bubbling through the cracks of her once fragile spirit. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Baby girl, if you want to do this, I'll be sitting front row, and you'll have the whole strength of this family standing with you." The night before the assembly, Maya practiced in the living room. Her voice trembled, her eyes darted to the floor, but Marcus kept reminding her, "Look up. Own your words. Don't rush. Every word you say matters." She stumbled. She restarted, but she never gave up. By the end, her voice carried steady, and for the first time, Marcus saw not just his little girl, but a young woman stepping into her power. The auditorium buzzed the next morning. Parents filled the back rows, teachers lined the sides, and students clustered together, their chatter echoing off the high ceilings. Marcus sat near the front, his frame stiff with anticipation. He had been on countless missions, had faced men armed with rifles, had stormed into danger without blinking, but nothing made his heart pound harder than watching Maya step onto that stage. She stood behind the podium, small against the backdrop of curtains, her hands gripping the sides. For a brief second, her eyes darted to Marcus. He gave her a single nod, steady and sure. That was all she needed. "My name is Maya Turner," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "Some of you know me, some of you don't, but I need to tell you a story about a bus ride." The room hushed. I was sitting by myself like I usually do, and some kids decided that because I was quiet, I was weak. Because I didn't fight back, I was less. They put their hands on me. And others? They laughed. Or they looked away. And in that moment, I felt small. I felt invisible. Her voice wavered, but she lifted her chin higher. But here's the truth. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean invisible. And cruelty doesn't mean strong. What makes someone strong isn't how loud they can laugh at another person's pain. It's whether they can stand up for themselves, stand up for others even when it's hard. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Students shifted in their seats, some glancing down, others staring at Maya with wide eyes. She continued, her voice gaining rhythm. "On that bus, my dad stood up for me. He reminded me that dignity is louder than cruelty, that I have a voice even if it shakes. And now I'm using it, not just for me, but for every quiet kid who thinks they don't matter. We do matter, and we deserve to be treated with respect."